Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. If you hopped on a minute or so after we got done kind of running through a couple quick logistics, I'm going to capture those again, just so you know. As you can just see, and you're probably having a little message across your screen at the moment, we are recording today's session. For that reason, please go ahead and mute yourselves if you haven't already. If for any reason you can't see today's slides, since we're hosting this in Zoom, make sure you just toggle over to the tab in Zoom at the very top that lets you see what the presenter is sharing. If you're just seeing our smiling faces, we want to make sure you get all the content as well too. And throughout today's session, you are more than welcome to use the chat to ask questions, and you're welcome to stick around after we get done and turn off the recording to ask any individual questions you may have. That could be eligibility or otherwise. So with that, welcome to the Understanding the NSF GRFP and How to Get Started workshop. For us, this actually marks the beginning of fellowship season for the Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Affairs and PhD Plus team. And we have a whole series of workshops happening over the summer and support that happens all the way to the fall, even up until almost the holiday break. And this is the first session that kind of helps us kick that off. So who are we is always a great question, especially if you are not at UVA yet and you're an incoming student. My name is Sam Lake. I'm an Assistant Director of Research Communication in the Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Affairs and a member of the PhD Plus team. My background is actually as a coastal marine scientist. Spent about 7 years running graduate and postgraduate fellowship programs here within the state of Virginia before coming over to UVA about 2 years ago, and that was actually the first workshop, Kelly, that I think you and I led together. So with that, I'll toss it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And I'm Kelly Oman. I'm also an Assistant Director of Research Communication with Sam here in the Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Affairs. My background is actually in the humanities. I have a PhD in English literature, but I have a lot of experience working with graduate students in the sciences, in STEM fields and across the university in a lot of different ways. And I've also been a GRFP reviewer, so have a lot of knowledge and experience working with students applying to the GRFP. So I'm a great person to come to if you want to make sure that you're communicating in a way that makes sense to people outside of your field, because I have just enough knowledge to know what questions to ask and to not be afraid to say when I'm confused. So feel free to use me for that.
Yep. And what's really nice, especially for our graduate students that we work with, is you have two people that have kind of different perspectives. What is always fun for Kelly and I is when we support students, we end up getting and giving a lot of the same kind of recommendations back. So we actually leverage each other and our own kind of experiences and backgrounds to support each other and make sure we're supporting graduate students as well. And if you haven't found your way into our programming, know that there's a lot more in the communication space, which is very broadly defined within our program, that we offer, from giving presentations to the grant writing and the fellowship side, to science policy, to op-eds, just about any type of communication or variation of communication you can think of. So come and find us for another series if you haven't already. So what are our goals for today's session? Well, we are going to literally just touch the top of the iceberg when it comes to the GRFP. We're going to talk about what the program is, what its goals are for NSF. We're going to review some eligibility and some kind of important information that you should know right from the outset, because the deadline is about 4.5 months away, which seems kind of close in some ways, but very far away in others. And we want you to know some of this important information right off the bat, so you don't put time, energy, and effort into something that you might not be eligible for, or you forget something that's really important that's going to come up later. We want you to be ready right from the onset and have all the resources at hand. We'll review the application elements and we will talk about them a little bit, some tips and recommendations. Know that if you are planning to apply, we have an entire summer fellowship series that actually spends a full workshop focusing on each of these individual application elements and some others that are common for other fellowships. So make sure you sign up for that series so you can kind of hear more and actually go through some of the activities we do in those workshops. And then finally, we'll talk about the review criteria and what information is actually shared with the reviewers that participate in reviewing the about 12,500 applications that come into NSF annually. And then we'll share what other resources and next steps that you need to be aware of. So that's a lot of information, and we're going to cover as much as we can in this hour. Know that at any point, if you have questions, you can visit bit.ly/PhD+_GRFP and get access to a lot of the resources that we're going to be sharing with you today. So what is the GRFP? Well, NSF started this program a long time ago, really with the goal of supporting the US when it comes to science and engineering by really starting with early career scientists and engineers. So their goal and their mission is really twofold, and I'll dive into more of that in just a second. But the important part that you're probably most interested in is the type of support that they provide. So the GRFP is a 5-year award with 3 years of funding, and that funding total is just under $160,000. And part of that is for stipend support, and part of that is for tuition and fees and kind of university type expenses. In terms of deadlines, like I said, it's about 4.5 months away. The deadlines are staggered depending on your discipline. They typically take place, though, the second full week of October. So for instance, in 2023, that was October 16th to the 20th. So we kind of plan and strategize our programming around those deadlines. And of course, I'm referencing 2023 because they have not released a solicitation yet for 2024. So we're expecting that to come out in about a month or so. So keep an eye out for that. Once we receive it, we will make sure that we're sharing that information out to everyone who's participating in this and our other GRFP events. Now, in terms of the goals for NSF, there's kind of 2 aspects here that they really highlight as you read through their materials. The first really focuses on supporting graduate students that are in a range of STEM fields that have demonstrated potential. And that's past potential, and that's also future potential. And they want to do that early in their careers. They want to make sure that the students that they're supporting are positioned well to take advantage of the fellowship funding to go on to be Nobel laureates, to be leaders in their chosen fields. That is really what they're kind of focused on. And that gets to kind of some of the intellectual merit aspects of NSF, which we'll talk about more later. The other aspect is really focused on broadening participation. And NSF has changed some of the wording on their websites, also the information they're sharing with reviewers to really support a broad spectrum of STEM early career professionals. And they're actively encouraging and doing a lot of outreach, particularly to students that may come from different backgrounds, may be historically underrepresented within disciplines, and really focusing a lot of support and even a lot of instructions towards reviewers within the broadening participation space. And we'll talk a little bit more about kind of these 2 areas and how they're reflected in the evaluation criteria for judges after we go through the actual application elements. To give you a little context for success rates and the number of applicants, last year, NSF, and this is the 2023 numbers, so not the most recent one, but last year they offered 2,555 awards to students. So the success rate for that, because they get about 12,500 per year, is right around 20% of applicants are receiving fellowships. So that's actually gone up, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So the funding has gone up, and the number of applications that are actually being selected and the percentage have gone up for 2 reasons. One, they recognize the costs and expenses and the stipend support needed for graduate students is ever increasing, and they're trying to meet that need, and for the tuition and fees as well for students at the universities. The CHIPS and Science Act actually gave additional funding towards NSF to support more students. So 2 things have happened recently with NSF. They've actually seen a decrease in the number of applications over the last 3 or 4 years, and they've received more funding to support more students over that same time period. So we're actually seeing higher success rates than we have historically seen, at least recently. So why should you apply? Well, $159,000 is an amazing thing to be able to receive. For you, a graduate student, it can give you a lot of freedom in the types of research and the experience that you can get while you're a graduate student. It gives you that 3 years of support. It doesn't mean you need to take it in the very first year you're awarded. You can kind of spread these out, move them around. If you're an undergraduate student, this actually means that you could potentially take this funding with you into your graduate program. And we know students that have received these in the past. It's an amazing thing to walk into a university with and allow you to have that freedom to select and kind of define your research project, potentially shop that around to labs you might not otherwise have funding to be able to support. There's a lot of freedom kind of embedded in receiving these awards. Of course, they are prestigious. You've probably heard about these in the past. There's fellowship awards. NSF also gives honorable mentions. Those are both notable accomplishments that should absolutely be reflected on your CV. Those are really prestigious things. And they do stand out, both in terms of kind of academic jobs, but also professional positions as well. So keep those in mind. Professional development wise, there are programs through NSF, including the intern program, that NSF GRFPs actually have access to, especially some programs that might be very, very selective or limited. So being a GRFP means that you have access to some of those programs first and foremost. And NSF is kind of continually evolving and changing those over time. So once you're selected, you get to hear more about what's on the horizon. And as I mentioned before, there is a lot of flexibility built into this award, both in terms of how you can use it, but also its transferability. And there is no kind of postgraduate service requirement for GRFP, which for some other fellowships, there are requirements of you will go and do things. You will kind of contribute, volunteer, support in other ways. There are no requirements with the GRFP in that space. So keep that in mind as well, too, as you're looking at other programs.
Okay, so who is eligible for the GRFP? This is where we tend to lose some people who hop off because they realize they're not eligible. So I just want to say, if that's you, before you leave, know that the summer research or summer fellowship series that we're doing will be about applying to any fellowship and is going to be useful for any student who intends to apply for a fellowship. And if you're looking for funding and don't know where to start or don't know how to determine what you're eligible for, please get in touch with me or Sam and we can help you find things that are a good fit for you. So please don't drop off our radar completely just because you're not eligible for the GRFP. So the first thing is you see the website at the bottom of the slide here. That's where you can go and actually walk through a series of questions to determine your eligibility. So some of these criteria are a little confusing. So that can help you figure out if you're eligible or not. If at the end of that you still have questions, come to me and Sam and we can help determine your eligibility and potentially reach out to the NSF to ask questions. Sometimes they're not super forthcoming with answers to those questions, but we can help you decide if it's worth your time to apply. So basically, who is eligible? US citizens, nationals, or permanent residents. And that's the biggest one that people find excludes them. So please note that you do have to be a US citizen, national, or permanent resident. You also have to intend to enroll or be enrolled in a research-based master's or doctoral degree program in an eligible field of study in STEM or STEM education. And we'll go over what those fields are in a minute. But this does not include joint MD, PhD, or JD, PhD programs or professional degree programs. So if you're in one of those programs, then you are not eligible. You need to have never earned a doctoral or terminal degree in any field. That terminal degree part also excludes some people. So if that's you, let us know if you have questions about it. Never previously applied while enrolled in a graduate degree program. So you can apply twice in your life as an undergrad and as a grad student, basically. This is where it gets kind of confusing because there are different levels at which you can apply. Sorry, Sam, were you going to jump in? Correct me.
I was just going to note that you can't apply more than twice, but you would have to apply multiple times during your undergraduate degree. So you applied as an undergrad, and then since you've graduated, but not as a graduate student, then in theory you could apply many times. I don't think they
Right.
actually.
Thank you. So yeah, this is where it gets confusing. So if you have applied as a grad student while enrolled in a graduate degree program, you can't apply again, basically. And you can't have won the GRFP already, won and accepted, and you can't be an NSF employee. And so, yeah, here's where we get more into the nitty gritty of that, how many times you can apply, rule, and when. So first or second year grad students can apply once in grad school. So that means that you need to make a decision whether you're going to apply in your first year or your second year. Of course, if you're in your second year, then this would be, or you're going to be starting your second year. In the fall, this would be when you're going to apply. If you're a first year and you're taking courses in the summer, then you must apply this year. So if you are starting your PhD program in the summer and you are taking classes, there's some question of whether, what enrollment means in summer courses before you start in the fall. So if that's your situation, then reach out to us and ask. But if you are doing anything with your program in the summer, it course wise or potentially, Sam, I'm getting into some tricky criteria here because we've seen problems with this in the past, and we just want to make sure that you apply in your first year if you are in this situation. So again, reach out to us if you have questions.
And generally what I would say is we find this happens most often with medical school students that come in the BIMS program, and they are actually enrolled and taking credit courses over the summer. Know that you just have to apply as soon as you get to UVA. That's the only year you'll be eligible. We do find this happens with some other programs within GSAS as well too, where you might be coming into chemistry, for instance. You're actually like starting to take courses. You're doing more than just hanging around UVA and doing research in the lab. When you start doing more than just volunteering and doing research in the lab, come and chat with us so we can figure out what's going to be on your transcripts and what might cause complications.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yes, you also, if you've earned a master's or professional degree in any field before or completed more than one academic year in a graduate degree granting program, then you are not eligible unless you are returning to graduate study after an interruption of 2 or more consecutive years before you're applying. And you are not enrolled in a graduate degree program at the application deadline. So that means if you're a current graduate student or will be when you're applying in the fall, then you do not meet these criteria. So keep that in mind if you've earned a degree, a master's or professional degree already. And undergraduate seniors in joint master's, bachelor's programs are limited to 1 application to the GRFP. So applying either while you are in that joint degree program or once you're in your doctoral program, but not both, because you are considered a graduate student when you're earning that master's degree. Next slide. Okay, so eligible fields of study. You can see here many STEM fields. So chemistry, computer and information sciences and engineering, geosciences, life sciences, materials research, mathematical sciences, physics and astronomy, psychology, social sciences, including economics, and STEM education and learning research. And those last ones get to the fact that this isn't just like hard STEM fields. This is also social sciences, even history of science. So getting into the humanities a bit there, education, and one thing to note is that when you are applying, you will choose your field and it might not match up exactly to the program that you're earning your degree in. And some people have research that can fit into 2 different fields and have a decision to make. So if you have questions about that, what field you would fit into, you can also talk to us about that. Note that this does not include clinical research or research with primarily disease or direct health related goals, because those fall under the purview of the NIH, not the NSF. So they typically don't fund research that falls into these categories. But for some of you, if that is your research, there are ways that you can present the research to focus on the more basic science of it rather than the clinical application. So again, talk to us to figure out if you can fit your research into this NSF model, or whether it's worth your time looking at other options. Okay, so as Sam said, we don't have the solicitation yet for the upcoming year, so we don't know when the deadlines are, but we do know that from past years, they'll likely be mid-October. So these are the due dates from last year's submission. Applications are typically due at 5 p.m. local time on a date that corresponds to the field of study that you're applying through. So if you're in the life sciences, then your due date would be Monday, October 16th, or would have been last year. So pay attention mainly to that due date week. Once you get the solicitation, know that your specific due date will fall somewhere within this week. And don't wait until the last minute. So once you have the solicitation, you know when the deadline is, you're starting your application, log in well ahead of time and get that application started so that you know that you know everything that you need to put into that application system. You start it, you run into any problems ahead of time so you're not rushing at the last minute. So you know that the system's not crashing while everybody's trying to get their applications in. It gives you a little bit of comfort knowing that you have your application ready to go, so you're not panicking at the last minute. The deadline for your letter writers to submit their letters is typically different than the deadline for your application. So make sure you know what that is and make sure your letter writers know what that is as well.
Two quick things. One, Kelly's only half joking when she says the system does crash. It does crash. So even if you're just applying the day before and it's crashing because life sciences is submitting theirs and you're an engineering student, make sure you get in that day early. You don't want to be at a disadvantage or potentially not get it submitted after putting in a ton of work. And what I'll say is I encourage graduate students to approach their application as the PI on a grant, just like your advisors would approach managing the submissions of letters of support and application elements and like getting comments and feedback back. You are the PI of this fellowship application. Set deadlines, plan to send reminders. We're going to talk more about that, but approach this entire process knowing that you are the one that's in control. And it is your duty, basically, to make sure that this entire process is managed and all the deadlines are met. And I will say that faculty advisors are the #1 reason that full completed applications do not get submitted on time. Things come up, and if they wait to the last minute, that can trip you up.
Yeah, and don't count on that mid-October deadline before we know the actual deadlines, because the NSF could surprise us and it could be beginning of October. Anything could happen. So as you're planning your summer, just make sure that you're flexible with that and you understand the deadline could be earlier, could be later. We don't know, but traditionally it is in that second or third week of October. So what does the application include? So there is going to be a application module where you can put in information. So these are things that would typically go on your resume or CV. So any personal information, like your education, work, research, and other experience. And this is where you would put in things like academic honors and awards, fellowships, scholarships, presentations, and publications. And while you might be talking about some of that in your statements, your written statements, you also want to make sure that you put these here and be really comprehensive and put as much there as possible, because it's actually one of the first things that reviewers see when they download your application. And we've seen people who have left those fields blank or just put very bare bones basic information. And that's actually a huge missed opportunity, because you can put a really good first impression on your application by having that be full. But that doesn't mean that you're not a competitive candidate if you don't have a lot of awards, fellowships, presentations, publications. It just means, you know, if you do have those, you want to make sure that the reviewers know you have those and you put them right up front. And then, of course, in the statements, you'll give us a more robust explanation of how those things prove your readiness to do the research that you're proposing to do and have the impact that you want to have. This is also where you put your proposed field of study. So choosing that field that you will be reviewed under and proposed field of graduate study. So yeah, as we have here in the quick tip, don't leave any of the fields blank if you can help it, because you want to make sure that you are using the real estate that you have for your application in the best way possible.
Yeah, my recommendation is log in as soon as NSF opens up the application portal. Like we said a couple times already, things could change, but the fact that you have 16,000 characters worth of information you can get in there, I think the applicants that approach it by thinking about what's distilling the most important information from a CV or resume that I can't fit into 3 pages of my personal statement, or I can't get somebody to put in their letter of recommendation. Put that at the beginning. It's a great kind of cliff notes of what's to come for the reviewers. And then they're looking for how you weave in and what you don't weave in, because maybe you have other stories or maybe you have detailed experiences that you're kind of putting in the statements. And then you can tell those things complement each other really well. Gives kind of a quick cliff notes version versus detailed experiences that drive and motivate you. And that can be really great for the reviewers.
Yeah, so what else does the application include? So there are 2 main written statements that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about because they're important, of course. So the personal relevant background and future goals statement, which we typically refer to as the personal statement or goals statement. This is 3 pages, single spaced, and it is your story and potential for STEM research. So we want to see who you are, what motivates you and what you're doing, and why are you or how are you a good candidate to be doing the work that you propose to do. So it's basically the story of you and why you're applying to this and what your future is going to be with this funding. And then you have a graduate research plan statement. So this is the actual research proposal of what you the project that you want to be working on. This is 2 pages, so shorter. So you have to be really, really strategic with how you use those 2 pages. And this is an original research project that you're going to complete during the fellowship years. And we're going to get more into the details of these 2 in a second. Then you have reference letters. So you will put in the names and email addresses of your reference writers. And you can put in up to 5 names, but only 3 of those will be used. So that means if you put in 5 people and you rank them and the top 2 submit their letters, the 3rd does not, but the 4th does, then that 4th will be counted in the 3 that the reviewers see. If all 5 submit their letters, then only the top 3 that you put in will see. So it's good to have those backups just in case you have a letter writer who does not submit or doesn't submit on time. You really don't want to be at the mercy of your letter writers. So if you can have that kind of backup in place, that's great. And then, of course, unofficial transcripts. So at least 1 must be submitted, and you want to include your transcripts for your graduate.
And unofficial transcripts is a little bit grayed out here for 2 reasons, actually. One is we find that UVA students, for your UVA transcripts at least, end up submitting official transcripts because you do need the university to be represented on the unofficial transcripts. And a lot of times the ones that students have access to through UVA and some other programs don't meet some of those requirements that NSF wants on unofficial transcripts. So my recommendation would be plan to just get official transcripts if you're applying for this program, and many others too. It just makes it's hopefully does not come at a cost, but it does make it a lot easier for the reviewers and for you in the end. A really important part of that, though, is if it's a PDF, official transcript, it cannot be encrypted or password protected. My experience as UVA students have not had that problem, but you may have that problem with unofficial transcripts or official transcripts from your undergraduate program. So just be careful, double check. The cheat way to get around that, just print it out and scan it. And all of a sudden it's there and it's not password protected as a PDF. So that's the easy way to get around it. And I'll say too, even if you're in your first semester and you do not have grades for your graduate courses at UVA, you still have to submit a graduate transcript. Don't forget to do that. We've seen a lot of people wait or think they don't have any grades to share and they don't request it. And then they get really in a time crunch to be able to get that submitted.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the statements now, but just know that our summer fellowship series has a whole session this summer on personal statements and research statements. So if you, we really encourage you to come to that because it will be general for any sort of fellowship application, but it does apply very well to the GRFP. So we'll get more into all of this in that session. And then in our boot camp in the fall for the GRFP, we'll have some more insight on this for you. But just very broadly, so the personal goal statement, this is the 3-page statement, and you're telling your story and demonstrating your potential for STEM research. So here's where you include experiences, both personal and professional, that have contributed to your motivation and preparation for pursuing a STEM career. And we have career bolded here because when you think about goals, you think about what you want to do with the work that you're doing. So it's not just motivation to do the specific research that you're proposing to do, but how does this get you where you want to go in your career? And what is the impact that you're going to have beyond this one project? So what has led you to where you are now and why you're doing this? We want to kind of see a story or trajectory of motivation, and that can be a shifting motivation. Changes, of course, happen in your education and life. And so what has brought you here? What is that story? You want to include previous research, industrial, professional experiences, any experiences that you have that show your preparation and motivation. But we don't want you to just go kind of a laundry list of your CV items. We want to see why you've done these things and why they've led you to the next thing in your career. So use the experiences that have informed your career, your trajectory so far, and motivate you today. And show us these things. Don't just say, I did X and it made me want to do Y. Show us you doing X and how it impacted you and how it led you to this next thing, to applying to grad school or whatever the next step was. You really use your storytelling skills here and show us what projects did you work on? So if you have research experience and you you did an internship or something, what specifically did you work on? And more importantly, what was your role in that? That's something that a lot of people feel uncomfortable with doing because they're like, well, my role was maybe really minor or, it was really a PI leading the whole thing and I just helped out. Don't discount those minor roles and don't discount what you contributed and what you learned in that experience. Take ownership of that experience and don't hide behind third person or the we language. Use your first person. I did this, I did that. And tell us what you learned or gained from that experience. Don't just leave it implied. Really spell it out. What did you gain from this? And articulate the importance of each experience and how it contributes to your role in the scientific community. That's another big aspect that Sam's going to get into with the review criteria for the GRFP. But we want to see how you're contributing and how you fit into a scientific community. What do you bring to the community of the field that you're joining or that you're a part of? And finally, what are your career aspirations and future goals? It's a future goals statement. That's part of the name of the statement itself. So that's really important. What do you want to do with the experience that you're having now and the research that you're going to be doing in grad school? How have your experiences shaped those goals? And then what do you want to do? And try to be creative and specific there. It's really hard for people to think about a future goal beyond just I want to be at an R1 institution doing impactful research and leading in my field. That's something easy for everybody to say, but what is specific to you about what your goals are and what's motivating you to get there? And Sam and I can help you think through some of those options.
And we haven't directly studied yet, so I want to make sure we highlight it here is as you're looking at all of this stuff that you want to try to fit into 3 pages. Also remember, you have to include 2 section headers within this application element and your research plan. And those are intellectual merit and broader impacts. And there's multiple ways to approach both of these statements and including those headers. For instance, you could save them for the end and use them as like recap paragraphs for everything that you had on the previous 2.5 pages of your personal statement. Or you could embed them in and have intellectual merit be the very first words on the page, and then you tell your personal journey and story and what motivates you and why you came to UVA and why a GRFP makes sense for you. And kind of telling like, I might go this way towards academia, or I might go this way, and funding this research and investing in me will help me decide like which direction I want to go. And then you have the broader impacts that relate to like the outreach or the extension or the application of your research and the involvement that you might want with like students, community, other things that you'll then detail in the research plan how you're going to do it. But like the fact that your research has broader impacts, you need to highlight that in the personal statement and then have it in some way connect and align with what you're putting in your research plans. It's not leaving reviewers sitting there scratching like, oh yeah, it makes a lot of sense that they want to do this and that's where their career is going. But hey, they're doing this research project that doesn't include any of that. Like for 3 years, why is that missing in this piece? So you want these 2 elements to fit really well together. So all that aside, to jump back into the research plan in a little bit more detail, this, first and foremost, NSF won't admit this, but we'll tell you right off the bat, it's a communication test. That's why they're asking you to do this in 2 pages. They want to see how clearly and concisely you can take a multi-year PhD research project, carve out a part of it, because remember, this is only 3 years of support, not 4, 5, 6, and communicate that really effectively to people that are researchers, somewhat related to your discipline, but not necessarily doing research on your discipline. So for instance, I've been a reviewer for several years. I'm a marine scientist, coastal ecologist, water quality, hypoxia modeling, stuff like that. That doesn't mean that I don't get whale studies and Antarctic research and things that I know very little about. They might as well be, brain tumors and other things like are far enough out there that I'm not sure exactly what you're doing, but I'm familiar with the terms and some of the methodologies, but that's about all I really know. So that means you, as the applicant, need to be able to have enough background of why I understand like this is really important and why it's important. Some good citations that kind of back that up. Then you quickly narrow down to what you are actually proposing to do, what your study is, and then probably broaden that back out, make a full hourglass shape where you connect it back with the community, the broader impacts, and the application of research. So as you're thinking about that research plan, keep in mind that hourglass shape. That's kind of what it's probably going to end up looking like in some ways. Now, the way you approach it, the way you structure it, and other things might change based on your discipline and some of its norms. But you are putting together a 3-year research plan that you're going to complete during the fellowship period. And you're going to have aspects in there that do touch on methodology, but you're not going to outline your full methods because that would probably take more than 2 pages in itself. You do want to highlight kind of the resources that you're going to use, but remember that, NSF is funding you, the applicant in the end. They're not necessarily funding this research. So that's why this continues to come back to, it's a research communication test. They're not reviewing it for the research and the application. They're using it as a test to see if you can communicate it and you have that novel research idea. And the reviewers themselves are being asked to do things like understand, is this creative? Is it novel? Is it something that's actually moving the discipline forward? Are you expecting to answer some really innovative research questions? What are you expecting to learn? Will you know if it's successful? That's one that I see missing all the times. Like, how do you evaluate success? And if you fail, do you have a plan B? And if you don't, and it's objective one of three, and you fail and you can't do the other two, it starts raising questions for the reviewers about how you're thinking about structuring your research. And if they invest $159,000 and objective one fails, like, how's the rest of that money being used? Could easily be a question that's asked. So keeping all this in mind, like I said, there's different structures of having hypotheses versus objectives versus research questions. That's okay. And as we actually bring people together to review these, Kelly, myself, but also as we have groups of faculty and postdocs and past successful applicants review these and give feedback to you all, we are actually changing our recommendations and structure based on the disciplinary norms as much as we can to kind of reflect that. Also know that, for a lot of this, it is that 50% weight of broader impacts. So if that section's really short or feels like it's, not concrete, or you haven't really thought it through, that's a lot of points in the evaluation criteria that you're not getting. So don't just focus on the novelty of your research. Make sure you're getting all those points for broader impacts as well too. And then highlight and think about how you do this in multiple ways. So what skills do you have? Well, you're not going to be able to list all those out in the research plan. So make sure that you're connecting those back to the applicant form, or your letter writers are saying that you have the past skills and techniques to be able to make sure this is a successful project. Think about this as a holistic application, and making sure that it does look like something that can be executed in 3 years, not 5 or 6. If you write it too big, it seems like you didn't get the scope of how big this research project could be. Okay, so that's as deep as we're going to dive for research statements and personal statements in this session. Like I said, we've got plenty of other workshops you can come to for more, but a couple other really important things about reference letters. As Kelly mentioned, you have 5 names and email addresses that you can submit. The ones that you submit, they need to be strong letters of recommendation. If you have a letter that's a paragraph from somebody like the president of the university, but they only know you this much, compared to somebody that you worked with for multiple years, or an internship supervisor that saw you go through something really, really hard and champions the research skills and stuff that you bring to the fellowship, that 2-page letter from the person that was managing your internship can mean a lot more than that paragraph potentially that a president could write about you. So you really want strong letters that echo the goal of this fellowship program. Who you're going to choose? Well, you have to pick one person specifically, and that's somebody that's going to be at least an administrator, GGS, or similar for your graduate program if you have not selected a research or academic advisor at this point. But you do need somebody at that role at UVA that can write that letter for you. I generally say that you should also have somebody that knows your research experience and skills, because the evaluation criteria for the reviewers does focus on research experience and skills in that intellectual merit section. So you kind of want to make sure that you have that represented. A third one can be anybody that can be a really strong champion for you. So consider people that might be outside your field if that's appropriate. Consider people that have been there and seen you develop and know what your goals are and you have strong relationships with. Those letters end up being very, very strong as well. But I encourage you to have at least 2 people, one from UVA, potentially one outside or within UVA, that can really speak to your research experience. Share things with them. When you reach out to ask them, and we already shared the timeline and kind of our recommendations for how you approach the next 4.5 months, share with them your draft materials. Share with them ideas of stories and experiences that you have from working with them, and give them those suggestions and say, it'd be great if you share this story because I can't put it in my personal statement and nobody else can tell it for me. And don't just tell them what that experience was. Tell them what your reflections were, what you got out of that experience, because they probably don't know. But the letters that include those kinds of details go even further to just showing that there's a solid relationship there and support that they have for you and why this fellowship makes sense for you. and tell them that, it's okay to submit these early. I would even suggest asking them to submit them, the week before the deadline. That way, you don't have heartburn and concern of these being submitted in time for you. That goes back to just manage this as if it was a grant. And if you tell them that and give them an early deadline and tell them why, they should understand. Doesn't mean that they'll meet that deadline, but it's okay to request an earlier deadline. Okay. You've heard me talk about these two things, intellectual merit and broader impacts. Unfortunately, we do kind of hit on this a lot because it is so essential. The reviewers are basically looking at all your application elements, and they are kind of scoring and stacking everything from across the application into these two criteria. And they're giving you scores based on it, and they're also listing lots of kind of feedback and recommendations back to the applicant. And NSF specifically tells reviewers, and this is a quote, to take a holistic, comprehensive review of the entire application, looking at these two different factors and looking all the way from the applicant form responses that we talked about at the very beginning, all the way through the letters and the transcripts, and use all of that information together to make scores and considerations. And with that, there are individual biases. We could probably never get that out of review processes, but NSF does a lot of training and support to try to get some of those biases out of this process and really direct all of the scores and feedback directly in these two areas. So with that, some tips and recommendations, and then we'll have some specific examples of what you should include within these sections, or at least what NSF recommends. First is make sure that you have those two headers in both of your statements. You have to, or they will not be reviewed. It's that critical. And if you look at the templates from NSF, they're actually already on there as well too. So go ahead, you can download those, or at least you can look at them as you craft yours, but keep those two in mind and know that NSF has resources, including templates for each statement for you to reference. Okay. For intellectual merit, this really is focused on the potential of the applicant for the proposed activities to really advance knowledge and understanding. So keep that in mind. That's the novelty of your research and everything else. Make sure you're sharing that with your letter writers. And what are examples of these? What are they actually telling the reviewers? Well, this goes to things like grades, courses you've taken, awards that you've received, your achievements. So stuff that would normally be in a CV, but also things that are the output and the products of your research. So some of those things could be your previous research experience that are going into letters of recommendation, or you're putting into your statements, those past work experiences that you can put in that earlier section, your grad research plan and kind of how you're laying out your actual research plan, and your ability to be successful in achieving that plan. So all these things with asterisks are specifically things that have been mentioned to reviewers. Other things we see coming up a lot is how students work within teams as well as independently, your ability to communicate research, interpret results, and actually find successes within those results and be able to share those out, and your willingness to put yourself out there, to take the initiative, problem solve, persist with challenges. And I'll just say, applicants that have overcome barriers and challenges with their research and their personal lives to get to where they are, those can be some of the best stories for reviewers to read. But I'll fully acknowledge that for applicants, some of those can be the hardest for you to write or to feel comfortable sharing. So feel free to talk to Kelly and I if you're thinking these could be great stories, you're not sure how to frame them to make them sound genuine, or if you're just not sure if you want to tell those stories, and we can talk through maybe how you can approach it or how you can have somebody else share that story for you. For broader impacts, this is always a trickier one because this is not the research aspects that most STEM students are trained in. Remember, there's two pieces to this. There's your own individual impact on society, or your own individual background that you may come from when it comes to broadening participation and broader impacts. There's also the impact that your research is potentially going to have on other people. So these are the two things that you can kind of start to play on. So examples of these could be increasing participation of underrepresented groups, women, students with disabilities, veterans, etc. So that may be you, or that may be you mentoring students that come from different backgrounds than your own. Outreach, mentoring students, supporting programs It could even be at the high school, middle school level. It could be outside of UVA. Those are all on the table. And developing a globally competitive STEM workforce here within the US is something that they come back to a lot. Public participation in science literacy, engagement, outreach kind of activities, all in that space. And as they're looking at your application materials, keep in mind, they're looking for leadership roles that you've stepped in too. Are you a president of an outreach program at UVA? Have you been on the leadership team of something at your undergraduate program? These are all things that you can include in there to show past leadership experience and things that go beyond your actual research to extending that research or to having leadership skills that you bring to your graduate program. And I've got a few other ones on here as well too. So feel free, we're going to share these slides, screenshot them if you want, but know that you always have these to look back to. But the asterisk ones are ones NSF specifically shares out. And for reviewers, they're looking for these things, and I won't belabor the point because I know our time is getting short. But like I said, they're looking at all aspects of your application for these things, and they want to make sure that level of detail and kind of confirmation is embedded throughout. So, and then the last thing I'll note is the reviewers are coming from similar disciplines to your own, so they know what kind of is the normal broader impacts that they would put in their own research proposals and what might be different and kind of novel and not something that they see as common. So you or your advisor might have a little bit more insight into like what's new and novel for your discipline, but it's worth asking around and having that in mind because then you might wow the reviewers because you're doing something that is not traditionally done within your field. And then the last slide for me is it's important to review kind of both the criteria, making sure that you're exploring some of those creative ideas, but it's also making sure that it's kind of well organized and structured and it resonates really good. And how these kind of two pieces of statements really fit together and complement each other. And then using the other materials just to kind of reinforce and back that up because what you write carries a lot of weight. And then the endorsements you get from reviewers, really depends on the strength of the letter writers. Some of them are really strong letter writers, some are not. Some reviewers will give them kind of a second tier, consideration compared to what they're actually seeing reflected in the things that you have crafted. So just keep that in mind. And they'll also be looking at, do you have the support, the structure around you, resources to be able to do the research? Because as we noted, NSF is providing funding for you and your stipend and your academic costs. They're not funding the research. So it does need to be reflected that you're able to do this project even without funding and direct support from NSF.
Yeah, so the big question for some of you, apply now or next year. If you are going into your second year of your graduate program and you have not previously applied, you must apply this year. So this is it. This is the year to do it. If you have previously applied as a graduate student, you're ineligible. But for those of you who are coming into your graduate program starting in the fall, you have a decision to make. Should you apply this year or wait until you are in your second year? And the important thing to know is that reviewers are instructed to review you compared to other people at your same level. So if you're in your first year, you're not being judged against second years. You are being judged at the level you are. So keep that in mind that a lot of people wait until their second year because they think they're going to be a stronger candidate because they've done more, but that's what everybody does. So everybody who applies their second year has done more than a first year. Generally. So keep that in mind that you might be a strong candidate in your first year relative to other first years. So think about what you've done compared to other people. I think in my review year, the majority of the people I was reviewing were in their second year. So that could potentially make it a more competitive time to be applying. But so apply this year if you're going into your first year, if you have extensive research experience with publications or conference presentations, are already involved in UVA organizations or have a plan for getting involved in the fall, have someone, an advisor, lab rotation PI, DGS, who can provide guidance on your research plan and write you a strong letter. So if you have people in mind that you're either already engaging with over the summer, or you want to cultivate a relationship with them in the fall before you send in your application, that's great that you want that support to help you put together the strongest research plan possible. And again, like we said before, if you're already enrolled or will be enrolled in the summer in graduate courses that will be on your transcripts, then you should apply in your first year. Does second year mean going into the second year in fall or currently wrapping up the second year? That means you'll be starting your second year in the fall. So you'll be a second year when you're applying. And if you anticipate that you are going to have a much stronger application in your second year, so you anticipate having a publication within the next year, or you need time to strengthen that relationship with a research advisor, somebody who can give you some support and guidance, or you want to get more involved, you don't have much involvement to show broader impact potential, and you have plans to do that, then you should wait a year and apply in your second year. The thing is, if you do wait, make sure you put together a really detailed plan for how you're going to strengthen your application so that you do actually do that work to be the strongest applicant possible in your second year. And we really recommend actually putting together an application your first year so that you know where the gaps are and what exactly you can do to make that stronger. And then you have that already as a base to revise your second year to submit a much stronger application.
We also find that if you start working on your application this year, sometimes it helps solidify some of those research ideas for your graduate program. And you end up actually saying, yeah, I should apply this year. I've actually been able to solidify what those research questions are, my committee, things like that, faster than I anticipated. And I'm in a much better spot now than I thought I would be at the beginning of summer.
Yeah, so you can go to the next slide. So we have a lot of resources for you, and we want to just draw your attention to some of them. And like I said, the Summer Fellowship Series is going to be a big part of that. So we'll get to that in a second. But on our website, phdplus.virginia.edu, if you scroll down, you'll see this banner that you have at the top of the slide here. You click on that and you'll get to what we have on the left here, just a summary of all of the support that we offer. And links to important things like last year's solicitation and previous support resources, a lot of things. So I encourage you to go there and just browse through it and see what's available. And then we also have this timeline PDF that goes through month by month what you can do to make sure that you're staying on track and getting together your application in a timely way so that you actually have time to do this, because like Sam said, the time's going to go really fast until October. So this just helps you put some structure to the time that you have, and also builds in what support we offer so that you know what's happening and when, and you can prepare for that. And here is information about our fellowship application workshop series starting on June 6th and going throughout the summer. There is a lot in that, and not every session might feel super relevant to you, so use your best judgment. We do have the Creating Strong CVs and Cover Letters session, which is more, it's applicable to fellowships and can help you think through some aspects of, what you're putting into that those fields at the beginning of the application with your the things that would traditionally go on a CV. But that one's not directly relevant to the GRFP, but it is available to you. And then we have our fall boot camp that will kind of condense everything that we're doing in our fellowship workshop series and make it directly applicable to the GRFP. So we really recommend going through that summer series and then coming to the boot camp to see more specifically, how does all of this apply to the GRFP and how can I get some ideas going for my research statement, my personal statement, all of that. So put that on your calendar as well. And then we don't have specific dates for the fall stuff yet, but we do have mini writing retreats, virtual office hours, and then our big event, the application panel review, speed dating that we do, where you submit your application materials and we have faculty, other grad students, postdocs, anybody who has review experience or GRFP experience, look at your materials, and then we give you feedback on them as if we are a review committee. So it's a really great way to see, get a lot of feedback at once and see how reviewers might be perceiving your materials and make changes before the deadline.
And we typically do that at the last week of September, so it's 2+ weeks away from the deadline. So you need a really good, that's a great deadline to have. I want a really solid draft at this point, so then you can get some really detailed feedback right before the deadline to be able to incorporate that. Have a final review by your advisor and then maybe some friends just for copy editing and submit. So that's a great strategy to take into it. There's a lot of additional resources. Like I said, you'll have access to these slides, but know that there are everything from past fellowship workshop series events, plus the ones that we're hosting this year that you're welcome to have access to, especially if you want to get a jump start like right away. There's some great FAQs on the GRFP site. Definitely read through those. They go into more detail and have more examples of what resonates with reviewers and what the expectations are in the FAQs than they typically do in the solicitation itself. So that can be really helpful. With that, we're going to stick around to ask questions. We've got a few on here. We'll record this. It's the bottom of the hour, so if you have to hop off, we totally understand. We'll see you at a future event, but we'll keep going as well to answer some of these questions that came in from you during registration. So with that, I see one that already came in. And I'll read these just so everybody's watching the recording later knows. And then Kelly, I'll let you take the first shot at it and I'll fill in. So the question is, do you know if BIM students who couldn't rotate in the summer are still eligible for GRFP in their second year if the core course is the first item on their UVA transcript?
Yeah, so assuming the core course is going to be in the fall of the part of the transcript. So the thing is, if your transcript has anything listed in that summer before your first year, that could potentially flag you as ineligible to review or to the NSF and to reviewers. Yeah, I think we need a little more detail here. So that would be something that would be great to talk to me and Sam about, and maybe, show us your transcript, what it looks like, and we can see how that would look to the NSF.
Yeah, there's two things on the transcript to look for. One is, what's the first course you enrolled in for your graduate program? Does that show up as a summer? It doesn't have to be course. It could be, like any other like 1 credit bearing somethings, seminars, etc. Does that show up in the summer? Or does it show up in the fall? The other thing to look for is there may be an enrollment date or month listed on your transcript as well too for your graduate program. So you want to check for those two things on your transcript. And the transcript is what the reviewers, and to a smaller account, the NSF staff look at to determine your eligibility.
If I already have a fellowship through UVA, can this be added to it? I'll let you take that one, Sam.
Yeah, great thing to confirm with your department as well too. But what I'll say is, yes, historically, you've been able to leverage multiple fellowships, assuming you have time to use all of that money while you're a graduate student. And sometimes you can even use those additional stipend dollars to plus up your stipend payments as well. So there are some benefits from having multiple fellowships. You can always defer the NSF GRFP for subsequent years as well. So if you have a fellowship that's going to fund you next year, NSF doesn't need to know that. You just won't start withdrawing on the NSF award until the year after or the year after that, because technically you could just use the funding in years 3, 4, and 5 and not use it all in years 1 and 2 after you've accepted it.
How can I check whether the stipend would be added to it? It's the Provost Fellowship. So I would recommend contacting your school. They would they would have the rules for that. I think it differs depending on the school that you're a part of. And they can give you specifics about what that, if that is an additional, amount that would be added to your stipend or not. So they can give you all the rules around that.
Your school contact, your DGS, like Kelly said, those are the best ones to answer it. Know that they might reach out to the NSF GRFP coordinator who has an office directly across the hall from where Kelly and I are currently sitting, and they might confirm some of that detail a little bit as well too, depending on where the funds are coming from. Of course. Some of the other questions that we got until we see more come into the chat is, how do grades affect your chances of getting the fellowship? Kelly, I'm going to kick that one to you first.
Yeah, so of course, it's great to have a great GPA. We see your transcripts, and that is a strong indication of your ability to succeed in grad school and in the research that you're doing. That said, if you have low grades at any point, if that is something on your transcript that you feel might be a red flag, that's something that you can address in your personal statement. You can say, bring up what your struggle was and show that struggle as a learning opportunity that you took advantage of and have grown from. It's something that your letter writers could address if you're not comfortable addressing it yourself, or you think they could make a better case for how you have grown from the experience and how you are the great researcher that you claim to be and aspire to be. So there are a lot of ways of addressing that kind of thing that again, Sam and I can help you strategize if you'd like.
Don't let a couple semesters even of bad grades deter you at all from applying for the program. What I tend to find is there's underlying reasons for that, and those underlying reasons might actually go to more about your potential for being successful in the future than they actually hold you back. I've had students in the past that have been working full time to make it through their undergraduate degree because they didn't have the resources or support or scholarships to be able to go to college full time. But when the letter of recommendation or their own statement includes that, and that speaks to that potential quote unquote weakness that others might see just based on grades, that actually can totally flip the narrative and actually show how strong that individual is. So those are great questions to come and ask Kelly and I, and we can talk about strategies, how you can account for it, etc. We have another question that just came in. Is it possible to gain feedback on our personal goal statements and research plan prior to the speed dating event in August?
Yes, absolutely. At any point, you can reach out to me and Sam, both of us, either of us, neither of us, and get feedback. Yeah, absolutely. And we have our virtual office hours where you can come and ask questions. At the writing retreats, we'll be there to answer questions, but also to look at drafts and to give you feedback. So we're happy to give feedback along the way at any point, like if you have a very rough draft and want to bounce some ideas off of us, or if you have a more polished draft and want that more in-depth feedback. Yeah, it's generally good to get feedback at multiple points so that you know that you're developing your statements in the direction that you want them to go, so that you know they're getting stronger.
I will say that we've already started having meetings with students who are planning to apply this year. Don't feel like if you're watching this video in 2 months that you're behind by any means, but know that we are always available for advising appointments, assuming our schedules aren't booked up, but we even hold back extra time to squeeze people in as needed. And you can visit the phtplus.virginia.edu advising site, and that will let you go ahead and schedule a 30-minute block for us. If you think you're going to need more time too, you can just let us know in the comments that you're sending, and we can block out additional time to meet with you. But that's a great way to see our availability and to schedule a meeting. And for everybody on the meeting right now, the link is in the chat. So feel free to grab or save that. Our next questions come to eligibility. I kind of grouped two of these together, which is, how can I determine my eligibility, and can international students apply for the NSF GRFP? We've kind of hit on both of these already through this workshop, but just know that if you have questions, and typically we run into students that do have questions about eligibility because, well, the solicitation is written by lawyers, and if they could make it more confusing, they would, and they have, is eventually the answer. And then the other unfortunate side of this is NSF is not good about responding to eligibility questions. It is extremely difficult. They don't know your situation. Without an hour-long conversation and knowing all the details, it's really hard for them to determine your eligibility. And even then, they don't want to put it in writing if you are or are not, because then that can be actually used against them. So chances are they will not respond to your email. It's probably better to come to talk to Kelly and I, because at least we can talk through your situation, some of the considerations that we know they are looking for, and just try to determine that with you. Kelly, any other thoughts on that?
No, I think that covers it. I want to get started now. What is next available online? Yeah, so we covered that too, that it is great to start now, start as soon as you can, just because to polish these things up and to make sure that you're really putting together the strongest application possible. Getting started early and getting feedback along the way helps a lot. So yeah, we have all of the resources online and all of the events for the summer and into the fall. We'll make sure that you get these slides again and information about all of those in a follow-up email.
My big thing would be, go ahead, look at the NSF GRFP site. If you're able to log in and see past applications that you've started, anything else, just to get an idea of what that system looks like, be familiar with it. Visit our website just so you're aware of what resources are there. Put June 6th for that first fellowship workshop series event on your calendar. But by attending today's event, you've checked about 75 to 80% of our recommendations for what you should complete in May. So you've already checked off most of this month. Start planning for June is my recommendation. Our next question is it possible to review recommendation letters prior to them being submitted to NSF to determine which ones are the strongest and the best to submit prior to the deadline if you have more than 3 recommenders? Well, I have an official answer and an unofficial answer to that. Kelly, I want to hear what you say first, though.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the recommendation letter writers will be submitting their letters directly to the NSF through the system, and you won't have access to view them. That said, you can always ask your letter writers if you can look at the letters before they submit them. That might be a kind of tricky conversation to have. Some people might not be comfortable with that. But you should make sure that you're choosing letter writers who can write strong letters, and they should, in that case, be comfortable with you looking at them. So that said, Sam, what are your?
So we have a half of a workshop focused on just this: how to coach letter writers and how to get strong letters of recommendation out of them. The most important thing to start off right off the bat is ask them in person or over Zoom. Watch their face when you ask this question. Ask them, can you write a strong letter of recommendation for my application? And if they flinch, they blink, they say, I'm not sure, they ho and they hum, be really cautious about requesting a letter from them. Because if they don't feel like they can write you a strong letter and say that immediately, that's a good indication that that might not be a strong letter, even if they're willing to write you one. And don't force anybody to write you a letter. If the time commitment's a problem, if them knowing you and like being able to write a strong letter is a problem, you'd rather have a strong letter from somebody else than a really weak letter or a detached letter from someone. We find all the time that students will let us know that their advisor, their letter recommendation writer, et cetera, ask them to take the first shot at actually drafting a letter. You can always offer to help them to fill in blanks, to review a draft letter if they have one. Totally on the reviewer on what they want that to be. And it would probably need to be somebody you have a close relationship with if you're offering that. People might say no. They might say it's not no, I've got it. Don't push if you offer and they say no. Because some people take a very this is a confidential letter approach to this process. But that's where coaching them can come in really handy. That's where like sharing stories, your experience, your reflection, what you think would be a good letter can help kind of clarify what might go into those letters. And that's why having a conversation with them first, following up to share ideas and recommendations and reflections on experiences can be so helpful. And just checking in periodically and sharing your CV, your statements can just help make sure that's a strong letter for you, even though you may never see it.
Okay, and what can I do this summer to make my application stronger in the fall? So there are a lot of things. I think the first thing is to get a comprehensive view of what you have done and what you can include in your statements, your the CV stuff, and see where the gaps are, and then plan based on that. What can you do this summer? You could join an organization. You could volunteer, you could do something that can strengthen your broader impacts, or you can start working on cultivating those relationships with letter writers, with somebody who can help guide your research plan. It really just depends on your situation, what you have done, what you haven't done, and who you know. So if you want to strategize with somebody, you can talk to me and Sam, and we can help you figure out what is the best use of your time right now.
Yeah. I would also say unofficially start asking around for past successful application recommendations from current UVA students or ones at your alma mater. They share a successful application in the past. You have some resources to kind of base like how you might approach it, people that you can go ask and talk to. Think about the support structure that you have around you, and then think about the missing pieces in your application. That's where I would focus this summer on. And this is not a sales pitch to come to the fellowship workshop series, but we've designed that series to answer that question specifically. And we'll even get to filling in your CV and other things that you can do over the summer, because 4.5 months is a long period of time. So with that in mind, we're going to wrap up as we have guest presenters in the rooms as well. Know that we are only part of your team. Hi, Melanie. Your advisor, your lab mates, current past fellows, people that have successfully got the GRFP before, that is your network, and then us on top of that as well too. We're here from now until way after you submit this application, and we want to be there to celebrate your success in April of 2025, which feels like a long way away, but that's when we anticipate hearing. So with that, know that we have all these resources. You can email us directly, you can schedule advising appointments, and you can see the full list of our support at that link at the bottom. And with that, the sun is not going down anywhere near this photo, but we will go ahead and stop recording. We welcome you to stick around and ask questions without the recording being on if you have any. And we will share this video very soon, as well as the slides.